This is a training session regarding the entry and processing of trade invoices in the Accounts Receivable module. Invoices are entered by selecting Invoices from the Accounts Receivable menu. The Accounts Receivable Invoice Batch Entry program now comes into view. On the left-hand side, we have a list of all the batches that are available for entering accounts receivable invoices. We can maintain these batches using these Add, Change, and Delete buttons. Let's highlight a batch and click Change. The system provides a batch ID and inserts our user ID. We can give the batch a description and indicate whether other people should be allowed to use this batch. This box lets you set your preference for repetitive insert. When you've finished entering an invoice and click the OK button, the system can either close the invoice entry window and return to the main batch entry window, or, if this box is checked, it can clear the fields and prepare the entry window for the entry of another invoice. Place a tick in this box to turn on repetitive insert. Check this box, and the program will flash a message each time you save a prepaid invoice, reminding you that you have flagged the invoice as prepaid. These two checkboxes refer to the Line Item Detail entry window on trade invoices. If this box is checked, then the Relieve Inventory box will be automatically checked by default whenever a detail line item is added to an invoice in this batch. If this box is checked, then the Bill Cost Code box will be automatically checked by default. The default AR account field should only be used if you have set up multiple accounts receivable accounts in your chart of accounts. If this field is left blank, the system will always charge new invoices to the default AR account. Here we can enter a default invoice type. This setting is requested so that when we are inserting a new invoice into this batch, the system will know whether to default to a trade invoice or a progress billing when the Enter key is pressed. If T&M billing is selected, the system will default to the trade invoice entry window and will warn you if you attempt to save an invoice in this batch that has no job ID attached. This button lets you select an invoice printing format for invoices in this batch. If Default is selected, then when you print the invoices in the batch, they will be printed using the invoice format selected in Accounts Receivable Setup. If you select a different format, this will be used for invoices in this batch. We can now indicate whether this is a repeating batch. Repeating batches would be useful if you were a property manager and you sent out billings of the same dollar amount each month to the same customers for rent payments or other repeating amounts. On the right-hand side of the window is a list box which shows all the invoices which have been entered into the highlighted batch. We delete, change, or add new invoices into this batch using these buttons. Click the Add button and we'll enter a trade invoice. The system now displays the Trade Invoice Entry window. We are able to select a customer by either typing the customer number or name fragment and pressing Enter, by clicking on the ellipsis button and selecting from the customer list, or by pulling down the customer name field and selecting from this alphabetic customer list. We can then enter a work order number, an invoice number, a purchase order number, and the name of the sales representative. Now we can enter a job ID. If the job ID field is left blank, this invoice will be considered a trade invoice. Trade invoices are non-job invoices for which the income is charged to the sales income account. If, on the other hand, a job ID is entered, the system will regard this as a time and materials invoice. This means the amount billed on this invoice will be applied against the Job Billed to Date field, and the income will be charged to this job's income control account, and the receipts applied to this invoice will be applied against the Job Received to Date field. Here we see the system has supplied an income account and an AR account. Don't change these unless you have a very valid reason for doing so. Here we can indicate whether this invoice is prepaid. In other words, did the customer already give us a payment? And we are just entering the payment and the invoice into the system at the same time. If this is the case, and we check the prepaid box, the fields below will be altered slightly to receive a paid date and the means of payment, whether it was a check number or a credit card. The system will then post the invoice amount to the indicated cash account instead of the accounts receivable account when the invoice is posted. For our example, we're going to leave the prepaid box unchecked. The system now asks for an invoice date and a due date. The due date will be calculated using the due terms field in the customer record, but it can be overwritten here. The system now allows us to add line items to our invoice.
In order to enter a line item, we click the Add button at the bottom of the window.
The system gives us a form into which we can enter our first line item. Some line items will be strictly text. In other words, we may want to place a line or a paragraph of text on the printed invoice. If this is the case, tick the Text Line Item checkbox and the entire form will turn into one large text entry box. In this instance, we're going to uncheck that box and enter a regular line item. Each line item can contain an item ID number. This can be any number you want, or the number can be looked up from the item price file. In order to look up an item,
We click on the Lookup button
and select from the items in the item price file. The system will retrieve the description and the unit price from the price file. If you have purchased the inventory module, a checkbox titled Relieve Inventory will appear at the top of the form. If this box is checked, then you must select an item ID from the item price file. The system will calculate the total amount at this time. Now the system asks us whether this line item is taxable. If we check the box, the system will apply tax to this line item once we enter a tax amount at the bottom right-hand corner of the invoice entry form. We can also indicate whether this is an equipment rental invoice. If we check this box, the system asks which piece of equipment was rented, and it will use that equipment's income account for posting purposes. If this box is not checked, the default income account will be supplied for us. It is either the job income account, if a job number was entered on the invoice form, or the non-job sales income account if the job number field was left blank on the invoice form. We should never need to change the account number displayed in this field. When our line item is finished, we click OK, and our line item now shows up in the Browse box. And the total of all the line items is brought over to the Subtotal field on the right-hand side of the window. We can now do some other things with our invoice. We can select the Discount and Retention tab, where we can enter either a discount or a retention amount for the invoice. Usually, retention is not withheld on trade invoices. You may offer a discount to anyone you send an invoice to. This is where you indicate how much of a discount you will offer them and when that discount will expire. You can also place a Ship To name and address on the invoice. When the invoice is printed, this Ship To address will be included on the invoice. In order to pull an address that has already been entered into the system, select what type of address is desired. If we select Job, Vendor, or Customer, we can use a pick list to grab the address information from the appropriate record. If we select Other, the system allows us to type in any address. On this tab, we can indicate whether this invoice is commissionable to one or more of our employees. If it is, we select the employee. If the system finds a commission percent stored in the employee record, it will automatically multiply the invoice amount by the commission percent and place the projected commission amount here. These commissions will be automatically pulled by the timesheet entry program during payroll processing. On this tab, you can enter two different things. The text typed into the memo field will appear at the bottom of the printed invoice. The notes attached to the invoice are for internal use and will not appear on the printed invoice. Now we will continue on and finish out the invoice. We can enter a tax percent or an amount in one of these two fields, and the system will take that tax amount and add it to the subtotal to give us a total invoice amount. We can also add freight charges or miscellaneous charges if applicable. Once we are finished entering the invoice, we click the OK button. If this batch has been set up for repetitive insert, the system will anticipate that we wish to add another invoice. It will clear all the fields and present us with a blank invoice entry form. At this point, we can either enter another trade invoice or press the Escape key or click the Cancel button to finish our trade invoice entries. Now, as we can see, the invoice we've just entered is displayed in the list box on the right-hand side of the window. We can now process the invoices that are included in the batch by tagging the batch and using the 4 buttons on the bottom of the window to process our invoices. The first process is the Change Dates in Tagged Batches button. This program will go through the batches we have tagged and change the invoice dates to the indicated date or add the indicated number of days to the dates of all the invoices in the batch. This may be useful if we have a repeating batch, such as trade invoices we are sending out to our tenants. The only change we want each month as we print our new invoices is the due date on the invoice. The next processing button is the Proof Listing button. Usually, we don't set limits for a proof listing. This way we will see all the invoices in the tagged batch. Use this listing to double-check the invoices for accuracy. If changes are needed, highlight the desired invoice and click Change to make changes before invoice printing and posting. The next button will generate a printed copy of the invoices in the tagged batches. As we click this button, the system will display a form that allows us to specify the way we want these invoices to be printed out. We can print just the trade invoices, just the progress billings, or all the invoices in the selected batches. Usually, when we print invoices, the system will print all the invoices in the highlighted batch and then mark them as having been printed. That way, when we come back and add more invoices and wish to print only those invoices that haven't been printed yet, we can select the option for Unprinted Invoices Only. Optionally, we can reprint an invoice once we've already printed it by selecting All Invoices or Printed Invoices Only. We can also have the system assign an invoice number to each invoice as it is printed. The reason for this is we may have purchased pre-numbered accounts receivable invoice forms from our form supplier. When we are about to print invoices, we can look at the first invoice in the printer and retrieve from it the correct starting invoice number. If this is the case, then we would ask the system to automatically assign invoice numbers to the invoices as it generates them. It can assign invoice numbers to all the invoices, or it can assign invoice numbers to only the invoices in which we left the invoice number field blank during invoice entry. The third option is not to assign any invoice numbers at all, and to use whatever number was assigned during trade invoice entry. If we selected to have the system auto-assign numbers using the first or second radio button, then of course we must supply a beginning invoice number here. We now click the Print button, and the system will print our invoices. Although the button we just looked at will print a copy of all the invoices in the batch, we may want to print just one invoice. This is easily done by highlighting the desired invoice and clicking this Print button at the bottom of the window. The last button on the left is used for posting the invoices in our tagged batch. The system will provide a default fiscal period and posting date. We can change either of these if we choose. We then click the Post button, and the system will post all the invoices in the tagged batches. It will generate posting reports, then give us one last chance to look at our reports and make sure the numbers are accurate. Then we can either finish the posting or click the Undo button, at which time the data will revert to the state it was in just before we click the Posting button. This concludes this training session on entering and processing accounts receivable trade invoices.